not a war on terror, but a war of terror.
This matters. The Afghani people matter, and we will not be silent.
The war in Afghanistan was a fraud right from the beginning, just as the attack on Iraq was a fraud, and the invasion of Libya is a fraud.
It is not just leaders, it is not just soldiers, it is journalists. Journalists are war criminals.
In October 2001, British and American forces invaded Afghanistan. The goal was to topple the Taliban and destroy Al-Qaeda. However, after 10 years of conflict, thousands of lives have been lost and $1 billion spent. British troops are still in Afghanistan. Today, on the anniversary of that conflict, people have gathered here in Trafalgar Square to protest.
We were right to oppose it in 2001, and we're absolutely right to be here today to say it's got to stop. Bring the troops home now.
It's 10 years since the invasion of Afghanistan and the launch of the war on terror. 10 years on, in one country after another, we have been proved right, and the politicians and propagandists, blinded by imperial arrogance, have been proven horrifically wrong. But still they don't give up. Once again today, the United States, Britain and NATO are in action in another Arab and Muslim country, and this time it's Libya. And this time they said it would all be different. There would be no boots on the ground. The Libyans would be in charge. The aim was protection of civilians. Tell that to the thousands of civilians who have been forced to flee, who have been wounded and have been killed by the bombardment of NATO and NATO-backed forces now in the Libyan town of Sirte. Tell that to the families of the estimated 20,000 dead who have been killed since NATO intervened and vetoed one ceasefire and set of negotiations after another. Tell that to the black workers who have been lynched by pro-NATO forces across Libya.
The so-called Middle East Peace Envoy, ex-Prime Minister Tony Blair, is calling for new wars against Iran and Syria. We do not want it. This war alone has killed, murdered 40,000 innocent civilians. 380 of our own British troops have died. We don't want it, and we cannot afford it. Because we cannot even pay for public transport. We cannot pay for voluntary services. Cuts to the elderly are happening, cuts to our police, amputations to the NHS, amputations to welfare services. And the voices of resistance are being gagged. We are being gagged and we are being silenced. Universities will become places for the few. These few will no longer be studying courses which encourage resistance or critical inquiry. These courses are being cut, amputated. Instead, the government wants students to study courses which are of benefit to society. This government wants students to study courses of benefit to the status quo. We are being gagged and protesters are being punished. The Whitehall kettled us like cattle, student and child protesters. But on September the 8th, the High Court ruled that the Metropolitan Police acted lawfully. They acted lawfully to stop us and tried to silence us. They can do what they like, but we will not be defeated. Martin Luther King says, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." This matters. The Afghani people matter, and we will not be silenced.
I am in my cozy, warm room, preparing for sleep. Suddenly, the scene changes. I am back in 1914, nearly 9 years old. The lives have changed, but they continue. May peace in the world prevail.
It's now becoming fashionable not just to criticise the Iraq war and occupation, but to raise doubts about the Afghanistan occupation. Even some Tories are expressing their doubts. On BBC's Question Time last night, Max Hastings said that it's time to withdraw because the war is not winnable and has been a waste of the lives of 300 dead British soldiers. What he had to be reminded of were the deaths of over 10,000 Afghanis and over 100,000 homes and sanity of Afghan people that has been destroyed. He needed reminding of that, and we shouldn't forget it. What is remarkable about these late converts to ending the war is the way they still strain everything to justify the interventions in the first place. Removing a terrorist government, bringing democracy to Afghanistan. None of them can bring themselves to utter the word imperialism and let that slip from their tongue, because that's what all of these wars have been about.
If anyone tells you the war on Afghanistan was about liberating women, slap them. Slap them with a shovel, slap them with a sledgehammer, just slap them. After 10 years of war in Afghanistan to liberate the women of Afghanistan, I think it's safe to say it was a giant flop, because now Afghanistan is one of the worst places in the world to be a woman. So, one giant flop. They had the audacity to label it as Operation Enduring Freedom. I find that quite hilarious. It's like a paedophile labelling his mission as Operation Children's Rights. So if 9/11 taught us anything, it should have taught us the sanctity of human life, not how to bomb the shit out of Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, dropping drones in Somalia, dropping drones in Pakistan.
10 years ago, we came here and we declared that any war, any attack against Afghanistan will never be in our name. At the time, the government and our detractors accused us that we didn't want for the Afghan people what we enjoy and take for granted ourselves. They accused us that we did not want them to live in a state of democracy. They accused us that we did not want for them freedom, liberty, that we did not want for their children proper education, that we did not want for their women liberation and freedom. That's what they accused us of. Brothers and sisters, we live in different times 10 years on. We now see a changing landscape and a changing terrain. The barren land of the Arab world has moved and mobilized. People are now rising because we, the anti-war movement in the West and here in Britain, gave them the inspiration that coming together, raising their voices, can change their realities. We saw what happened in Tunis, we saw what happened in Egypt. Let's make absolutely sure and absolutely clear that the people who rise against their dictators never ever have to resort to asking for the West to intervene. Let's make absolutely sure to stand side by our Syrian brothers and Yemeni brothers, so that they never ever have to ask for the intervention of NATO, Britain, America or anyone else, but they change their realities by themselves.
Let's be clear, we're all, each of us, paying for it ourselves. Every time they make a cut in public services, the money they save goes into the war. Every time you go and buy anything in a shop that is taxed, the taxation is used to buy bullets to kill people in Afghanistan. So this is a very personal responsibility that we all have ourselves for what we do, and everything in this war is our responsibility. And of course they don't give you much history, because in 1840 Britain had another war with Afghanistan. The reason was that the empire, the British Empire in India, thought that the Afghan government was interfering with our government of India, so we invaded Afghanistan. We captured Kabul, and then there was a great rising and the Afghan people threw us out, and many British soldiers were killed in the retreat from Afghanistan. And this war has gone on and off ever since, and many, many wars have occurred. When the British Empire was built up, it was built up by war. We occupied India, we occupied Pakistan, we occupied Sri Lanka, we occupied South Africa, we occupied Canada. The Americans were colonies, and it was all done by war. And wars become something we sort of told to accept as a national duty. They say people gave up their lives. They didn't give up their lives. They joined the army and were killed or maimed.
The people of Afghanistan are paying with their lives. 30,000 dead, and in Pakistan, another 30,000 dead on top of that. But let's not forget, not everybody is made poorer by war. There are many companies which profit from warfare, and that could be the British companies linking up with Israeli companies for the next generation of British drones. The British drones which are currently bombing people in Afghanistan are being made in conjunction with Elbit, the #1 Israeli military weapons exporter. And that means our drones are using technology that has been road tested on Palestinian and Lebanese civilians. And we say we want an immediate embargo on all arms trade with Israel until it applies with international law. But we have a special message here today, a special message for David Cameron. The £12 million that you are spending every day on the war in Afghanistan, we want that money spent here. We want it spent on hospitals, we want it spent on schools, and we want it spent on rebuilding a welfare state that you are ripping apart.
Today, no one seriously believes that the war in Afghanistan can be won. After 10 years, we have a record number of civilians killed. There are more foreign troops now than ever before. Tens of billions of dollars are being spent unnecessarily, 14 billion in this country alone. The Afghan government is utterly corrupt. The Afghan people are completely impoverished. There must be a political settlement. Only the people of Afghanistan and the region can achieve peace. Peace cannot be achieved by foreign troops and foreign mercenaries. Dialogue amongst Afghans is needed for lasting peace.
We've heard this afternoon that when it comes to waging war, the government can find the money. We've heard that when it comes to killing people, they've got the money. But when it comes to saving lives, when it comes to the general health of this population, they say, actually, we haven't got much money. The Health and Social Care Bill is due in the House of Lords in a matter of days. While KPMG may be licking its lips at the prospect, health professionals across the country are saying this will cause irreversible damage to what should be the most treasured institution in this country. I am, of course, talking about the NHS. £850 billion were pumped into the banks in 2008. Why can't they go after the banks? Why can't they go after the rich that avoid their tax to the tune of £25 billion a year? Why can't they cut the war? Why are they going after the NHS?
That's my grandson, that's Kevin. He was killed not by Afghanis, but by the British and American governments. They have the total responsibility for his death. And there are so many Afghanis dying, around about 60,000 now. And apart from wanting to get the British troops home safely, I want the Afghani people to have a chance to live a life. a life that we all enjoy and understand by our own people making, not the decisions that this government's making for us, but the decisions that are made by our own people, not by an invasion force. Because I know that if some people attack this country, I would be willing to fight back. And that is all the Afghanis are doing. And I admire them so much for it.
What has the war on terror achieved except for more war and more terror? We were given various reasons for why we are in Afghanistan, why we invaded. We were told it was because it was to eliminate Al-Qaeda, to make our streets in Britain safer. We were told it was to create a functioning Afghan state. We were told it was to bring stability to Afghanistan. We were told it was to eliminate the Taliban and improve conditions for women. I'd like to just give you a few facts about Afghanistan now, today, after 10 years of intervention and after trillions of dollars. On stability, the level of violence is rising, not falling. The number of soldiers killed was an all-time high last year. 711 soldiers killed, more than any other year since the invasion. The number of civilians being killed is also rising, up 15% this year. 2,700 innocent civilians killed last year. And what's more, Afghanistan's nuclear-armed neighbour, Pakistan, has been badly destabilised by the war on terror. It now boasts its own Taliban. Before 2002, there was no Pakistani Taliban. Suicide attacks were virtually unheard of. Since 2002, 35,000 Pakistanis have died as a result of terror-related incidents. Last year alone, there were 300 suicide attacks in Pakistan. There comes a moment where you have to ask, what is more dangerous, terrorism or counter-terrorism?
You know, today, at the very moment that we're here, the United States, Britain and France are bombing a city in Libya called Sirte. It has 100,000 people. Day and night, residential buildings, clinics, schools have been hit with fragmentation bombs and hellfire bombs, hellfire missiles, which are also called vacuum bombs. That means they suck the air out of your lungs. The media refer to Sirte as a pro-Gaddafi stronghold. The Channel 4 reporter in Libya describes the attacks as cutting off the head of the snake. For such heroic journalists, there are two types of humanity in war. There are worthy victims and unworthy victims. The people of Sirte are unworthy victims, and therefore they're expendable both as people and as news. In Iraq, the people of Fallujah were also unworthy victims. American Marines, helped by the British, killed some 5,000 people there. Last year, I used footage of what had happened in Fallujah in a film of mine. It was shocking. It was almost a vision of Hiroshima. Not a frame of this film was broadcast when all this happened 6 years earlier, although it was offered and it was rejected. As Harold Pinter would say, and he often spoke up here, none of it happened. It didn't happen even as it was happening. It didn't matter. Everything was used in Fallujah: cluster bombs, white phosphorus. Cancer is now rampant in that city. In Afghanistan, I filmed a woman called Orifa kneeling beside the graves of her husband and 7 other members of her family including 6 children. An American F-16 pilot had dropped a 500-pound bomb on her small home, which was made of mud and straw. I walked into the crater and saw pieces of human bone. We've had 10 years of such crimes that didn't happen, that didn't matter. 10 years. The revision is now well underway, and I'm not referring to the Sun or the Daily Mail. Yesterday, The Guardian said that the invasion of Afghanistan was understandable, and to wage a short war was unavoidable. Understandable, unavoidable, no mention that Al-Qaeda had left Afghanistan when the invasion began. No mention that the Clinton administration had been secretly dealing with the Taliban regime for an oil pipeline, even inviting the Taliban on a secret trip to Washington. No mention that the Taliban were lavishly entertained in the Texas mansion of the CEO of the oil company Unocal. No mention that the attack on Afghanistan almost certainly had been planned before 9/11, as Pakistan's Foreign Minister Nayaz Nayak later revealed. He was told in July of that year that Washington had decided to get rid of the Taliban regime because they were unreliable. Some people who ought to know better swallowed the lies about Afghanistan being unavoidable, understandable. Many in the women's movement in the United States listened to Hillary Clinton lie that an attack on Afghanistan would liberate women. When this excuse wore thin, drugs became the issue. No mention that the Taliban had actually eliminated the opium trade. Today, young people on the streets of British cities are addicted to heroin thanks to British and American deals that allowed their favourite warlords to restore the opium trade. Look, the war in Afghanistan was a fraud right from the beginning, just as the attack on Iraq was a fraud, and the invasion of Libya is a fraud. According to evidence published in France, but not in this country, the so-called National Transitional Council in Libya promised to grant 35% of oil concessions to the French company Total in exchange, and I use the term, they used the term rather, in exchange for France's military involvement. And here's David Cameron boasting that Libya is the model for humanitarian intervention all over the world. Your presence today, you should never, ever underestimate this. Your presence today is so important because you and millions like you all over the world represent decency, sanity, outrage. The Camerons, the Blairs, the Straws, the Obamas, the Bushes represent extremism. They are the enemy. For what, let me ask, for what can be more extreme than the slaughter and suffering of so many innocent people? Never lose faith in your own power, for they are not invincible. They fear this power. They and their apologists fear you calling them to account. Above all, they fear you disobeying their atrocious rules and believing their atrocious propaganda. Because from Egypt to Chile, Wall Street to right here in Trafalgar Square, there's only one way now, and you know what that is. It's called civil disobedience. Thank you.
Leaf Windows UK, the company with the widest choice in double glazing, from UPV.
Margaret Thatcher had it right. There is no society anymore. What there is a transnational security elite that is busy carving up the world using your tax money. To combat that elite, we must not petition. We must take it over. We must form our own networks of strength and mutual value, which can challenge those strengths and self-interested values of the warmongers in this country and in others that have formed hand in hand an alliance to take money from the United States, from every NATO country, from Australia, and launder it through Afghanistan, launder it through Iraq, launder it through Somalia, launder it through Yemen, launder it through Pakistan, and wash that money in people's blood. I don't need to tell you the depravity of war. You are all too familiar with its images, with the refugees of war, with information that we have revealed showing the everyday squalor and barbarity of war. Information such as the individual deaths of over 130,000 people in Iraq, individual deaths that were kept secret by the US military, who denied that they ever counted the deaths of civilians. Instead, I want to tell you what I think is the way that wars come to be and that wars can be undone. In democracies, or the pseudo-democracies that we are evolving into, wars are a result of lies. The Vietnam War and the push for US involvement was a result of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. A lie. The Iraq War famously is a result of lies. Wars in Somalia are a result of lies. The Second World War and the German invasion of Poland was a result of carefully constructed lies. That is war by media. Let us ask ourselves, of the complicit media, which is the majority of the mainstream press, what is the average death count attributed to each journalist? When we understand that wars come about as a result of lies peddled to the British public and the American public and the publics all over Europe and other countries, then who are the war criminals? It is not just leaders, it is not just soldiers, it is journalists. Journalists are war criminals. And why one might think that that should lead us to a state of despair, that the reality that is constructed around us is constructed by liars, is constructed by people who are close to those that they are meant to be policing. It should lead us also to an optimistic understanding, because if wars can be started by lies, truth can be started, peace can be started by truth. So that is our task, and it is your task. Go and get the truth. Get into the ballpark and get the ball, and give it to us, and we'll spread it all over the world.
What I do know is that there have been a lot of casualties in this war, mostly not ours, mostly Afghanis, and I think how can you put a price on that? You know, do you balance these things up, saying, well, they got a little bit of democracy, did cost them 50,000 lives, but they got a bit of democracy. You know, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me.
And lastly, do you think music plays a particularly important role in the protest movement?
Not really. No.
But you've got, I think you've got, I mean, particularly coming out of Egypt now, there's a sort of a music scene that's almost allied with the protest movement.
Yes, sorry, that's different. If you're talking about in the Arab world, I think it does, yes. And I'm very glad it does. I don't think it does here, really. I suppose because I think we've become pretty immune to the idea of musicians making records that are supposed to support political causes. I mean, I have mixed feelings about it myself because I find it propagandistic. You know, I find it. I don't like the idea of pulling emotional strings to make people make a decision about something. I would rather give them facts and figures, like I did in this speech.
What implications has the last 10 years since the war? How has it affected the Muslim community?
Well, again, on two levels. Firstly, there has been this sort of demonization, a collective demonization of Muslims, the seeing of Muslims as though they are subversives, that they are a threat, they are a fifth column if they reside in the West. If they don't, if they're back in their own countries, then they are backward, and they have no idea about democracy, how to run their own affairs, in total need of Western intervention in order to help them become civil and know how to run their own countries. It's been a very, very difficult 10 years, but at the same time, I think that also those 10 years have seen the emergence of the new British Muslim community, a Muslim community that has no inhibitions about reaching out and reaching across the dividing lines of community and society. You know, the fact that the Muslims have been part of this anti-war movement from day one is, I believe, a testament to the will, the vision, the clarity, the bravery of the Muslims here in Britain.
There was a lot of talk about winning hearts and minds. Were you part of that, or is it more the sort of fight against the Taliban?
Well, when we went there, the fight against the Taliban started kind of about halfway through, when they became resurgent, and they kind of, winter had ended and they filtered through the mountains to where we were. But I mean, it was just very confused the whole time we were there, and even up to the highest level, no one really knew exactly what they were doing, and that was apparent. But I mean, for me, it was initially ethical. It was initially, and it was never a political thing until much later. It was always an ethical thing. I didn't agree with the way people were being treated there, and all I tried to do was exercise a legal and contractual right. When I got back, I changed my position. No contract puts you into kind of moral stasis, and I was refused that. And at that point, the campaign started. I launched a campaign.
And what's the feeling like among other soldiers out there as well? Was there confusion, or were they behind what they were doing?
Yeah, there was always confusion, and we were never really given a solid reason. I mean, it shifted from day to day between all those reasons I gave before. And I think in terms of the mood among soldiers then and now, it's probably reflected in the letter we're handing in. We've got 25 ex-servicemen, a few American, mostly British, Afghan and Iraq veterans to sign this letter, and that really kind of reflects the times that these people are really, really angry and distrustful of the government.
And you said you've got 20 signatures. I mean, among the wider sort of group of ex-servicemen you're in contact with, are they behind you with this?
They are, yeah. It's really interesting. Obviously, people aren't willing necessarily to put their name because they'll be attacked for it, they'll be prosecuted for it. But the guys who have, I think it's very telling. And in fact, today, just after I gave my speech to open, two guys approached me, now journalists, both ex-parachute regiment, and said, put our name on it as well. So clearly that feeling's there if people are approaching me and saying, add my name to it. And I think that's partially tied up with, I mean, you can't disconnect austerity and the wars either, because I think a lot of soldiers are coming back, leaving the army disillusioned. There's nothing to go to. Their own families are being attacked by austerity, and there are no jobs. And I think that's also reflected in the willingness to sign this letter.
Do you think a lot of ex-servicemen feel neglected by the government then?
Absolutely. I mean, once you're cut loose, that's it basically. And I think a good example of that is injured servicemen, particularly guys with post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, there's no facility, virtually no facility. The army doesn't even want to recognise it. It's a matter of policy. They don't diagnose PTSD even when it's apparent. And these guys are being cut loose into our society, and part of that feeds into, or provides the reason why we've got 20,000 ex-servicemen in the judicial system at the moment, and that's domestic violence, drugs, self-medication, alcohol. It's a really, really big issue, and the military doesn't want to know once you've left.
And just lastly, as an ex-serviceman, do you think your voice added to the anti-war movement carries a certain amount of weight to it?
I hope it does, but it's not really about me. And there's a trend developing. There's another guy locked up right now. Obviously, there's this letter. And the key thing, I think the establishment tried to kind of focus on me and simplify it to like hero or coward. And it isn't really about me. I'm completely irrelevant. It's about Afghanistan. That's where people's focus should be. And on Libya, and on Iraq, and on Yemen, and all these places. That's where the fight is taking place.
Libya, your thoughts on that conflict? Your thoughts on that conflict, the role of British servicemen in that? Is that, I mean, an expense the government can't afford?
Well, it's quite offensive. I mean, Cameron was, it's been all very kind of jolly. We're going to do some recreational bombing, and it's really, obviously he will never see it or experience it at either end. So I wouldn't take my cues from him for a start. But there are two reasons. One of them's the economic. That's always a driver, and even in their language they reflect this, because they talk about bringing democracy and diversifying the oil industry. I mean, the language itself is corporate that they use, and also the other key reason is to hijack the Arab revolutions, and they've done that fairly successfully in Libya. No revolution is backed by NATO. No revolution is backed by NATO. That's a fact, and you have to take those key points and look at them when you frame Libya and what's going on there.
What can people take away from today's protest?
Grief for all the people who've been killed and dispossessed, and their country savaged by more war, and grief in this country from all the soldiers that have been killed. Absolutely a waste of human beings, a waste of resources, a waste of everything. A very bad colonial war.
It's clear that most recent severe wars, such as the Iraq War, have started as a result of lies promoted and amplified by mainstream journalists. It's also clear that without lies in a democracy, war rarely occurs. Therefore, we should ask the question of the deaths that occurred in Iraq and other countries that have of the deaths that have occurred in Iraq and other countries in wars that have been started by lies, what share of those deaths lay at the feet of journalists who have abused their position and abused their responsibilities to promote illegal wars of aggression.
So do you think then that there is a sort of a client relationship between sort of elements within the political classes and the media?
For mainstream press organizations such as New York Times, CNN, The Observer in the United Kingdom, Times and so on, they grow to a position of power that means that they come to the table of power, socially, in terms of shareholdings and so on. They are at the table with the political elite, and they grow close to its interests. And the political elite is always close to the military and intelligence elite, whose services it depends on.
You're finally coming clean, Mr. Blair, is this right?
Well, yes, I have to face the truth sooner or later.
Well, the speeches have now finished in Trafalgar Square, and we're going to go and join the demonstrators as they make their way down Whitehall, past the government offices to Downing Street. Why are you here today?
I'm not really fond of people being killed, especially not for duff reasons, yeah.
And were you always against the war in Afghanistan, or was there a certain point where you realised it was wrong?
Been against most of these wars since 1978, so yeah, this is familiar trodden territory, yeah.
Thank you very much.
My parents raised me right.
Well, this is 10 years on from the start of a disastrous war in Afghanistan, and an even bloodier war on terror overall. This is about us showing that after 10 years, the majority of the British people still don't want this war, want the troops brought home immediately. 10 years, enough is enough. That's the message.
And do you think that actually is the consensus, that the majority of the British public are against this war?
All opinion polling evidence says so, yes. About 70% of people would either want the troops withdrawn immediately or in a very short time span, certainly not wait until 2014 as the government's proposing. So yes, we do speak for the majority of the British people.
And we're down at Downing Street at the moment, where I believe a letter's been handed in, signed by some ex-servicemen. How important is it to have them involved in this?
Well, it's very important because, of course, they are among the victims of the war. Nearly 400 have died in Afghanistan alone. Many more have been seriously injured psychologically and physically. I think it's unprecedented that while the war is still going on, so many ex-servicemen, servicemen and their families have turned against it. That shows how much this war on terror has lost support.
And lastly, I mean, we've seen a lot of young people on the march today, and particularly a lot of Stop the War events as well. And this war's been going on for most of their lives. What sort of an effect do you think that's had on the younger generations?
Well, I think the fact that the war in Iraq is one of the things that made the younger generation more sceptical about parliamentary politics. But you're right, what we're now seeing is people joining our demonstrations who were very young indeed, wouldn't know anything about the Afghan war when it actually started. This war has unfortunately become part of our life over the last 10 years, but I think protests, and particularly young people protesting against it, is also becoming part of our political life.
We're here to end the wars, yes? That's what we're here. Simple, really simple.
The reason to come is to support the oppressed people of Palestine, Bahrain, Iraq and Afghanistan. There is an unjust war. I will say not war, but it's an occupation or invasion, because they are not attacking us in Britain. We are living in London, but they are not. The Afghan army are not coming to attack here, but our army is there. So it's an occupation or invasion. We invaded a country. So it's not a war on terror, it's an invasion for a country. So we are here to oppose that, and we want our troops back.
It's 10 years yesterday since we went to war in Afghanistan. Now, it's an illegal war anyway, and I really think it's very, very immoral and wrong. And I really don't want us to continue for another 10 years, not even 10 days. We're wasting lives, money, God knows what else, and there are no winners.
I never knew that my country was going to invade other Arab countries before, and it's all about oil, in my opinion. It's nothing else, and it's greed and lust, and our biggest export seems to be from Britain is the arms industry. So, you know, I'm very ashamed to be British.
There were thousands of people here, but I think it represents a much, much deeper pool of opinion in British society. In the last 2 weeks, we've had two opinion polls, one showing 65%, one showing even more opposed to the war in Afghanistan. And I think it's been an expression both from the wide range of speakers, from the people here, from the range of protests, and from the militants at the end of this demonstration, which has laid siege to the gates of Downing Street, which actually is something I don't think we've done in the entire 10 years of Stop the War's campaigning. So I think it's very much in people's minds, and very much a part of the culture now in Britain, that the majority of the population are opposed to these wars.
As an Iraqi living in Britain, I think it's my duty as a British Iraqi, and for every other Iraqi or anyone who's been affected by the war of terror, and just anyone in general, anyone who's human, to show solidarity with the people who've suffered from the war of terror. The millions of people, refugees and everybody, it's just completely our duty, and that's why I'm here, and that's why we're all here, in fact.
In Syria, people try to put it in a pro and anti situation, but it's not really the case over there. People ask me who I support, and I say I support my country, I support the Syrians there. We just want no intervention, first of all, because every Friday they protest there. There was a Friday where they asked for foreign intervention, and they completely lost the respect of every Syrian, because we know we're strong enough to deal with the situation in Syria on our own. And Syria, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of the views about Syria have been blown way out of proportion. It hasn't been portrayed correctly in the media. And because I recently came back from Syria, and to tell you that there are some troubled areas, but other areas, people are carrying on their lives as normal. And I just want people just to see the truth and what's going on, because Syrians, we are strong, we are a great nation, there's a huge amount of unity there. We all stand by each other, and we also stand by all our other Arab brothers and sisters. We want to show them that we are all united, showing solidarity with everyone, even Afghanistan. That's why we're all here today, to show them even after 100 years? 10 years, sorry about that, 10 years, that we are all standing together and that we do support you, and no matter how long it takes, we're here.